Earlier in this week, John Ziegler stopped in for a visit, and he was on the Today Show and Piers Morgan on CNN, among other shows such as TMZ. And John joins us now. His website, of course, framingpaterno.com. And John, I know that the mainstream media hasn't been kind to you since your appearances on these shows. Of course, no surprise, because they have their own agenda. And as we said the other day, a buffoon like Piers Morgan knows nothing about the Joe Paterno situation. You have now written extensively about your interviews with Jerry Sandusky and Victim 2, who was the victim in the shower that Mike McQueary supposedly saw Sandusky either raping or not raping. And your evidence is overwhelming.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for being someone who willing to actually read it and digest it. And the evidence we put together is the subject of really, frankly, a year's worth of work when you think about it. And the article itself is almost a mini book. And you can see it at framingpaterno.com. And it does have documents that have never been seen before. And to me, Kevin, this is a classic situation where in trying to correct the media malpractice, we're actually exposing more media malpractice because the only thing anyone's talking about with regard to this incredible article that we put out about the real story of the 10-year-old boy in the shower, who, by the way, for the record, was not a 10-year-old boy in the shower. He was almost a boy in the shower, for whatever that's worth. The only thing anyone's talking about is this issue of whether or not the name should have been released, was released. Did I do enough to protect it? What did I do when I realized that the name inadvertently had been released, and then we got hit with the cyber attack? And then I guess the most amazing part, or the most disturbing part to me, Kevin, is that I've been called a liar and I'm basically a terrorist by TMZ and by even a Penn State website, Onward State, which I've now posted on the plane ride home last night from New York to Los Angeles. I wrote a very extensive article which was posted on Onward State today, responding to their accusing me of concocting this entire scenario to try to protect my grand plan to divulge the name. Now, Kevin, you're actually part of that article because, as you know, you had me on your show on Tuesday afternoon, and we discussed this very issue as to how am I going to handle this.
Right.
And so, you know, your show is part of the proof that this was not some part of some grand plan that I had. In fact, I was trying to be a nice guy.
That's right, and I would have been different. I said on the show.
I get no credit for being a nice guy, and I diminish the impact of the article by not using his name, which I had every right to do. And let me explain why I had every right to use his name. And this is, Kevin, can you help me understand why this is such a difficult concept for the media?
No, I cannot.
I mean, this is amazing.
And this is, by the way, John, this is why I said you should use his name, what you're about to explain.
No, I know, and you're right, and I should have. But the reality is that in May of 2011, after the original allegations were in the local paper against Jerry Sandusky, victim number 2, in his own name, as a 24-year-old married sergeant in the Marine Corps, wrote multiple letters to the editor in local Pennsylvania newspapers backing Jerry Sandusky and saying that the accusers should not be believed. Now, at that point, he loses any ethical right to anonymity on this story. For all intents and purposes, he is a public figure on the story. And yet people are acting as if, you know, even in trying to protect his name, that somehow I'm doing something awful, when the New York Times did exactly the same thing to victim number 1, who had never gone public and was younger at the time. Victim number 1 had never written anything in his own name about this, but the New York Times gave so much information about victim number 1 that he and his mother had to move, and they got no blowback for that. So, I mean, it's just unbelievable that, the phrase "no good deed goes unpunished." This is like the classic example of that. Now I'm being called a liar and a scumbag and a terrorist, all because I tried to do the nice thing. And then just another layer of insanity on this. The person who convinced me to change my mind was Jim Clemente. Now, as you know, Jim Clemente is the guy who was the sex crime expert from the Paterno Report. And Scott Paterno had told me that as long as Jim Clemente was on board with what I was doing with the Sandusky interview, and he was involved at every single level, Kevin, before and after I asked questions of Sandusky that Clemente asked me to ask, and Scott Paterno emailed me and said, as long as he's on board, he'll stay silent. Well, Scott lied about that, because Clemente has been on board all the way around, and even after Scott Paterno throws me under the bus, I still decide, you know what, if Clemente really wants me to change my mind, and by the way, Clemente had been supportive of divulging the name. He told me I was right to do it at first. And then he said at the last second, I was on the limo to the Piers Morgan show, he calls me, which did not help with the Piers Morgan appearance, by the way, because that went south in a big way.
I don't think so. I do not agree with you there.
Well, I mean, it was an interesting appearance. There's no question about that.
I thought you bludgeoned him.
Oh, I think I did too. But the point here is that I tried very hard under circumstances that most people would have just said, you know what, go screw yourself. You know, Jim, you didn't push Scott Paterno hard enough to keep his promise. You know, why should I be doing you a favor? And so when I got off the Piers Morgan show, I thought, okay, here's a way to handle this. I said to Jim, and tell me, Kevin, I think you're going to think this was a really good idea. I said, Jim, here's the deal. If victim number 2 really doesn't want to be identified, I'm happy to consider that, but just have him call me. Because I was under the impression that there was a line of communication to victim number 2, and Jim thought that there was. It turns out there was not, which is interesting, because I'm not sure if I was deceived or whether it was a miscommunication or what. But I said, just have him call me. If he wants special consideration, at least let me understand why, right? That's reasonable. And somehow TMZ takes this as I'm terrorizing him, I'm threatening him, that unless he participates in my documentary, I'm going to out him. Now, that's not what I said.
How do they arrive at such a distorted conclusion like that?
Because it's a nice story, you know. I mean, and the weird part is I had been on TMZ Live on Monday and explained this whole thing to Harvey Levin, and
so don't they look like buffoons when they turn that around?
Well, it doesn't matter because here's why they don't look like buffoons. This is another classic way in which the media works. So I try all day yesterday to get in touch with TMZ and say, hello, can you at least let me respond here? This is ridiculous. I don't even get the dignity of a response to tell me they won't let me respond. I mean, and if my name had been Lindsay Lohan, they'd be thrilled to have me on to combat the report. But I'm not a celebrity, so
you should have stolen something. You should have stolen something and they'd had you on.
Crap all over me, and it doesn't matter. That's the way it works now. It's all about you have no leverage if you are not a celebrity or don't have a massive platform to fight back on, and so they lie. And then some goofball at Onward State decides to buy in to this conspiracy theory that somehow I was involved with. And if people read the article, which I've written at Onward State and which I've posted at framingpaterno.com, and I hope you'll read it too, Kevin. When they see what I was going through and at every step of the way what I was thinking, they're going to realize that these allegations are not just false. They're utterly laughable and outrageous, and then really almost Louis Freeh-like. I mean, that's what the great irony is, that they took tweets that, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. They took one tweet that I did during the middle of the cyber attack on Tuesday night while we were trying to fix the problems on our website, but we couldn't because of the cyber attack. I had tweeted, I have fixed the problem, right? Well, the reason why I did that was because on my computer it was showing that the problem had been fixed, but because of the cyber attack, the problem, my edit wasn't taking, and I had no way of knowing that. So, they write that as proof that I lied, that I knew, that I claimed to fix it when I didn't. Well, I thought I had fixed it, but I just couldn't because of the cyber attack, which, by the way, I have posted in the article a chart proving we were attacked at exactly the same time when this article got posted. So, I mean, I don't know what else I can do. I've tried everything. I'm pretty despondent about the way this whole thing has gone down. It's completely unfair. I've done this for no money. I put all my time and effort over a year of incredibly hard work trying to pull off miracle after miracle. You've been involved with this as much as I have, and to get your character blasphemed and to have you be the target of it when all you're trying to do is find out what the hell the truth here is really beyond depressing.
No, and I understand how that is, John, except that you've done the right thing. I know you've done the right thing. And the only people that don't get it are these mainstream media jackasses. And that's fine. If they want to mislead the public, that's what we have these days in terms of media. We have people that are blowhards who know nothing about the subject matter in which they're discussing it or taking charge of an interview, if you want to call it that. And they have no knowledge. And so, as I said yesterday, had I approached an interview with the lack of information, the lack of background, the lack of knowledge that Piers Morgan approached the interview with you, I would have resigned that moment if I were him, right on the air. I would have resigned. I would have said, I'm far too incompetent to conduct interviews and conduct a talk show. I'm a moron. I'm going back to England where I belong.
Well, I think the paycheck he gets every 2 weeks probably will prevent him from doing that. But see, these people, I can assure you that as soon as that show ended, everyone told him what a jackass I was, how right he was, how wrong I was, and that we'll never let this guy back on CNN again, and so they make him feel better. They live, one of the many things I've learned about the news media is that these guys live in such an unbelievable bubble. This is part of why they have absolutely no clue about the real world, and they honestly think that they know things that they don't really know, because they think that it's inherently smart or credible because it comes out of their mouth, because everyone around them is telling them how wonderful they are because they're celebrities. I mean, news died the moment that newscasters became celebrities. Those two moments. The first moment that a TV caster put on makeup, and the first moment that a newscaster became a celebrity. Those two moments set this thing, down the slippery slope to where we are today, where news is totally dead and journalism is dead. And frankly, the reason why the narrative of this Penn State case, the Sandusky case, is never ever going to change is that it's just too complex. I mean, Kevin, I couldn't even get Matt Lauer and Piers Morgan, two of the highest paid people on television, to understand the difference between defending Joe Paterno and defending Jerry Sandusky. And if I can't do that, and I'm pretty good at this game, if I can't do that, how in the world can you explain this incredibly complex story where details actually matter? The news media is now a situation where if it can't fit in a tweet, it's too long, it's too complicated, we don't have the attention span,
right,
and the truth just doesn't matter.
And they're too lazy to find out. Now, the strangest part of this, maybe, although there's so many strange parts to it, but perhaps the strangest part is Scott Paterno's reaction. And, excuse me, in reading on your framingpaterno.com site about Paterno's reaction, Scott Paterno's reaction, where he called you in a 15-minute profanity-filled tirade. Tell us about that. What was that all about?
So he finds out that through the grapevine that I've interviewed Jerry Sandusky, and he calls me. I was actually on the other line with Dottie Sandusky at the time, and so I say, Dottie, can I call you back? And I take the phone call, and Scott proceeds to as I said on the website, for about 15 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, basically just scream at me, curse at me. Before I ever got a word out of my mouth, he threatened me. He made numerous bizarro world accusations about me and things that were just completely false about my history, my background. I mean, it was in the most. I kept thinking the whole time, Kevin, I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, this guy had his father have the biggest rush to judgment of all time, in my opinion, against him. You would think that you might at least ask a question, did you interview Jerry Sandusky? What is your intention with this? What did he say? How are you going to disseminate it? Those might be reasonable questions, right, before you determine what your reaction is going to be.
Yeah, I don't even understand why he's concerned about you interviewing Sandusky to begin with.
Well, there's two, in my view, there's two elements. One is somewhat legitimate and one is completely illegitimate. I have no problem if he thinks politically that it is a bad move because people just can't comprehend the difference between Paterno and Sandusky, and that therefore, if you combine the two, somehow you can't win that argument politically. I actually understand that. I can see that. That's logical. It's legitimate. And if that's the case, silence on the Paterno family part would have been perfectly legitimate. I have no problem. I wasn't asking for them to come forward and say, way to go, John, you've solved the case. I get that. I understand it. But unfortunately, what Scott did was he ensured that the difficulty that he anticipated with that was going to win the day, because he gave the media all the excuse they needed to dismiss all the revelations what we've come up with.
Exactly.
Because even he is in support of. So that's, in the media mind, that's it. That's game, set, match. And so in anticipating a problem, he ensured that problem would sabotage the effort. Now, the second part of this equation, which is not legitimate, is the sabotage part, which I absolutely positively believe was because of a personal problem that Scott Paterno has, both with his own involvement in this story as well as my knowledge of that involvement in this story and my willingness to try to get to the truth of what really happened here. So that's what I think's really going on here, and it's incredibly unfortunate. I mean, I was almost in tears on the Today Show talking about it when Matt Lauer asked me about it. I mean, it's just incredibly sad and unfortunate, and the most ridiculous thing is, I want to emphasize this again, I was in contact with his own sex crimes expert, Jim Clemente, every step of the way, and he emailed me and told me after his tirade, and he found out that I had been in touch with Clemente. Scott Paterno emailed me and said, if Clemente's on board, I'll stay silent. I mean, that might have been not a direct quote, but that was the essence of his email. And he didn't do that. He lied about that, and he went forward way before he had any clue. I mean, he didn't know anything that was in the interview. He didn't know anything about what I was going to do other than I was going to be on the Today Show. And frankly, I think when he found out I was going to be on the Today Show, he flipped his lid, because then he realized that it was going to be obviously taken very seriously, and that I would be somehow legitimized, and he needed to make sure I was not legitimized.
And why would he want? I mean, is there some sort of jealousy on his part? And when you say he knows, of his involvement, give our listeners a background of that. What involvement of Scott Paterno's in this story is embarrassing to him?
Well, Scott Paterno was Joe Paterno's lawyer during the process of the grand jury testimony, as well as his 2 police interviews that he gave. I am in possession of the transcript of the second police interview that Joe Paterno gave, which no one has ever seen before. Scott Paterno was also leading the PR response, if you will. I even laughed to call it a response, because the response was so pathetic. The PR response to what ended up happening on November 5th of 2011. And frankly, I think Scott Paterno knows, and I've told him this, that they screwed up big time. They screwed up huge in this. Now, and I've always felt that there's only 2 explanations here for the way Scott Paterno has acted, because his statements have been very contradictory, both to me personally as well as his public statements, and some of the people that he's kissed up to in this, who have been Paterno critics, like Jay Billis, he's kissed up to on Twitter, Sarah Gannon, he's kissed up to on Twitter, Joe Posnanski, he loves, even though Posnanski, I believe, threw Joe Paterno under the bus when his book came out. I've always been very confused by this, and I think that Scott Paterno is conflicted by his own involvement in how this whole thing went down, and I also think he's conflicted when it comes to, for instance, his own career. I mean, he is a Republican Party lobbyist in Harrisburg. That's his career, and as you know, Governor Corbett is a significant part in this story. So he is conflicted on all this. He's uniquely poorly suited to be the person who is trying to correct the record here, because I think he's compromised in several ways. And I'm trying to be as nice as possible here. I really honestly am. I've taken the high road on this as much as anybody in my situation ever would. But I blame Scott Paterno for why his father got fired. I really do. I think it's almost obvious, and I think he knows that, because he gets extremely upset whenever that's even implied.
Do you believe the rest of the Paterno family members went along with his statement that they gave to NBC News?
Well, I'm sure at some level they did. I don't know if there was a vote. I don't know By the way, the statement doesn't even mention me, and although it certainly is, there's no question it was intended to be a disowning of me. I don't. Look, I'm in an impossible situation here. I mean, I had a very, very long talk with Jay Paterno back the first weekend of the football season last year, and I like Jay a lot. I think Jay's a very smart guy. Let's just say that the statements that Jay Paterno made after the Paterno report were released were very, 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 very different than the statements that he made to me in his living room with regard to his view of what transpired here. I was a bit shocked by that, and so my personal take is that the Paterno family has decided that they cannot win this game 100%. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to play nice to the media and take the politically correct route to in the long run, having the media decide, you know what, we've been tough enough on Joe Paterno. We'll take him off of the dead list and just put him on the probationary list. Or you understand what I'm saying? In other words, that I think they're just decided to instead of fighting, they're going to go along and hope for an easing of the sentence by the media. That's my sense of what their strategy is. Which they're entitled to that. It's their family name. Mm-hmm. I get that. I take that very seriously.
But it doesn't make sense to me. And they know the media has caused this, and so they should know the media is not going to rectify this. Nowhere down the road is the media going to start clamoring for Joe Paterno's statue to be returned, for Joe Paterno's victories to be restored, for Joe Paterno's reputation to be cleared. There is no way in this world that the ESPNs of the world or the CNNs of the world will ever clamor for that. So how Scott Paterno doesn't get that, and if the rest of the members of his family don't get that, I'm stunned by that because of my experience in talking to them. I got from them what you and I have believed all along and what we've seen through the evidence, that they see the same thing we see, that the King and Spalding report points that out. There was no one more shocked other than me when I heard the response, supposedly of the Paterno family, but now we know it was Scott Paterno himself, to your getting an interview with Jerry Sandusky.
Well, let me just say one other substantive thing, which really, forget about the personal part of this. What I don't get is, how do you find out the truth of this matter, Kevin, without speaking to the central figure? In all seriousness, I mean,
you don't.
It's not possible. My interview, the 3.5 hours with Jerry Sandusky, is a gold mine of facts and context that we never knew before. And, like, for instance, my interview proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that Sandusky's retirement had nothing to do with the '98 investigation, and that he was a whisker away from taking the Virginia coaching job until the Jets lost the last 3 games of their 2000 season, and Al Groh, a Virginia graduate, realized he was going to get fired and called in the middle of Jerry Sandusky's second interview and said, hey, look, I want the job. And then all of a sudden, the warm and fuzzies Jerry was getting turned into a cold winter breeze, and the next day Al Groh was hired. If Al Groh doesn't lose the last 3 games of the Jets season, then he's still the Jets coach. They make the playoffs. Jerry Sandusky's the Virginia coach. None of this ever happened, right? Because 5 weeks later is the McQueary episode. So, I mean, that's one of 100 things that you could never know unless you talked to the main figure. And one of the things the Paterno report does is criticize the Free Report for not speaking to the primary figures, which it didn't.
Right.
So where does Scott Paterno get off criticizing me for not just talking to one of the main figures, but the main figure?
And I don't even understand. This business of this Ask Pierce Morgan. Well, why do you give Sandusky oxygen? I don't even know what that means. But why wouldn't you talk to a guy that did not testify in court? I think we always want to hear from a person who didn't testify in court once they're convicted. Because they have at this point, he has no reason to lie.
Right.
He's convicted.
And by the way, on this lying thing, I only ever highlight statements from Sandusky, Kevin, for which there is corroborating evidence, or at the very least, it's against his own self-interest to say. And I mean, and Sandusky tells me all sorts of things I didn't want to hear, all sorts of things that are not in his self-interest, all sorts of things that are backed up by corroborating evidence. And frankly, I have found that when he is positive of something, he's right every time. I mean, everything he tells me has, or virtually everything, has, I've found out, been, I'm able to back it up in some way.
And at nowhere in that interview does he somehow indict Joe Paterno. So I don't get Scott Paterno at all.
Well, I think it's more of an emotional. I think it's personal. I don't think Scott's a rational actor on this, frankly.
No, I would agree with that. And to issue a statement saying anyone who uses the Sandusky interview to defend Joe Paterno is misguided, I think anyone who would make that statement is misguided.
Well, I appreciate that, and I agree with you. And it's just so unfortunate. I mean, it didn't need to be this way. I tried everything. I've talked to Jim Clemente more than I've spoken to my wife over the last month. I really have. That's not a joke. And I just don't get why this needed to be the way it was. But then there's no question that it killed whatever value it was going to be in the Sandusky interview, because it gave the media the only excuse they needed to dismiss it. And then, of course, when NBC made the mistake of starting to promote this thing as if it was Sandusky from prison himself, which got the victims' rights advocates all up in arms. Once you start creating that narrative, there's no going back, because then because the media is so stupid, it doesn't matter that this wasn't Sandusky being interviewed. There was nothing illegitimate about this. But once NBC starts to get criticized, guess what happens? Everyone runs away from it because it's radioactive.
Right.
The irony, the greatest irony of this whole thing is that of all the bad moves that Scott Paterno has made from a PR standpoint since this whole thing began, this was probably his most effective move that he's ever made, even though I think it'll hurt his cause in the long run, because in my opinion, if you go strictly by the Paterno report, and I told you this, I don't know if you remember it, but I took some flack for this. If you go strictly by the Paterno report, I don't see how you get to full exoneration for Joe Paterno ever. I don't think you do, because it will always, always, always be as part of the narrative that there was a sexual assault that he knew about, and that he, really didn't do much after that. And as long as that stays. And there's and right now, without new information, you can never correct that. As long as that stays as part of the narrative, he will always at least be partially blamed. In the long run, they might eventually say, well, let's put this in context, and I think that will happen eventually anyway. But he'll never have full exoneration, and that's what Scott Paterno wants. Then okay, it's his dad or his client, as he refers to him, which I find to be rather creepy.
That is more than creepy. Absolutely more than creepy. And I don't understand why the interview on the Today Show kept being, it began and kept on being about, do you, John Ziegler, believe Jerry Sandusky to be a pedophile? What did that have to do with the interview?
What it had to do with, and I thought about this, that had nothing to do with the interview. It had to do, although Matt Lauer said, he eventually says something to the effect of, it's important that we understand the context of where you're coming from. No, what really was happening there was that Matt Lauer needed to cover his own ass. That's what that was. In fact, most of the interview was the ass covering. Do you believe Sandusky's a pedophile? Here's the reaction of the victim's attorneys. Here's the reaction of the Paternos. And by the way, this to me shows how broken our media is. Since when do you get to issue statements about what someone said or did before they said or did it?
Right.
How does that happen? When did that rule get started? I don't understand that. That doesn't make any sense to me. But that's the world we now live in, because our attention spans are so short. In the old days, I would have gone on the Today Show that later morning or afternoon. If they wanted to react, they would have reacted, and then I would have, in theory, I would have had a chance to respond to that.
That's right.
And that would get reported. Well, now, that doesn't happen, and TMZ doesn't even return my phone calls when they lie about me to what the hell actually occurred. It's just...
We're in a sad state. I've been saying that for a long time. We're in a sad state. We're becoming a police state more and more, and we have a media that is so in bed with the politicians and the political administrations in this country that they cover nothing with any real journalism. And I believe journalism died the day Mike Wallace died. Once he died, that's it. There are no other ones around.
It's a technological and an economic problem. The Internet and overnight TV ratings have killed any sense of truth or journalism, because all that matters. I mean, literally all that matters was they look at the overnights and they go, okay, which story, blipped on the up, which stories blipped on the low. The ones that went low, doesn't matter how important they are, they're gone. We're not recovering them anymore. We're going to chase after the blips. And if that means that a hot white missing girl somewhere got a bump in the ratings, guess what happens? That's a news story.
Right.
And if Benghazi happens and it doesn't blip, guess what? It's not a news story.
It's so true. All you have to do is watch the HBO series, The Newsroom, and you'll see it right there. I mean, they've done such a phenomenal job on that show of depicting the media as it actually is. Mm-hmm. Even though people are going to look at that as a satire, it is truth-based, and it is exactly the way the media operates.
And I guess the most frustrating thing to me, and I predicted this, in my open letter to the media before this whole week happened. People can see that at framingpaterno.com.
Yeah, you did. You predicted it.
I predicted exactly what was going to happen, and I also predicted that most of these people who attack me won't even bother to call me for comment. There were 3 articles in mainstream organizations written about me yesterday, Kevin, some of which even said, claiming to know who I am or who I am and who's the real John Ziegler, who is this guy. Not one of them even bothered to call me or email me for comment. And I'm the most easily accessible guy there is in this world of the media. And that to me is just unconscionable. How do you do that without even contacting somebody?
Well, you don't if you have any ethics, and they don't. Hey, we got to run. Great stuff again, John. Framingpaterno.com, folks, is where you can find the truth. And the rest of this is crap. John, great stuff.
Thanks. Have a great holiday weekend there, Kevin.
You have the same, John. Bye-bye now. Happy Easter.